Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's time for another video game collector's guide, buyer's guide. This time we're backtracking. I know we did NES last time, but we're backtracking. We're back into the throes of Atari. We're talking about the ill-fated 7800 ProSystem. Now, the 7800 has a very complex history. It was designed at a time where video games were king of the world, but it got put on hold because of the infamous market crash, and then it got released, I should say, after the NES came on the scene and revitalized the home video game market in North America, to no avail. People were like, it's Atari, cool, I love Atari, but it's just Atari. And what I mean by that is, even though it's 8-bit, and I'm using air quotes here, 8-bit, comparable to processing power of the NES, I say comparable, not quite, but close. It's in the same ballpark, you know. It's as comparable as the, PS2, GameCube, and Xbox are all comparable, even though there's clearly, more power as you climb the ladder. This is not as powerful as the NES, but it's comparable. It's very similar. Now, the Atari 7800 has the misfortune of having to compete with the NES, which hurt it for two reasons. One, the NES was phenomenally popular, and two, because of Nintendo's, we'll say, illegal monopolistic contracts, third-party companies who made games for the NES were not allowed to make those same games on the 7800, which means a lot of the games on the 7800 are modified or slightly enhanced ports of existing Atari arcade games you already played on the 2600. Now, it's worth noting that the 7800 is fully 100% compatible with the 2600 because it uses the same hardware on the inside and the same cartridge port. So whereas the 5200 used bigger cartridges, the 7800 reverted to the 2600 style cartridges. Now, there are a handful, less than 100, exclusive games to the 7800 that rely on the 7800 hardware. Most of them are arcade ports. A handful of exclusives, not really worth your time. And some games that companies were able to get around Nintendo's contracts by licensing the game to Atari to publish it on the system and things like that. So you do have Double Dragon and a couple other big hits at the time that are recognizable as games that were on the NES, but the 7800 version is questionable at best. Comparable to the NES in some regards, inferior in other regards. Now, it's also worth noting that when the 7800 was designed and intended to be released, the standard was a joystick at the top with a numeric keypad similar to a phone pad at the bottom, and then buttons on the side. That was what game consoles looked like at the time it was designed. The Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the 5200. However, it came to market after the NES, or around the time of the NES, which standardized the D-pad and face buttons as the controller norm, which was replicated by the Master System, also on the market at the same time. So Atari did redesign the controller later on to resemble the NES pad with the D-pad and the two buttons on the side. However, none of the games required the number pad in the first place, and they were all programmed with the joystick in mind, so the D-pad does have a screw in the middle of it that you can screw in a kind of joystick nub, if you will, so that you can get joystick functionality out of the D-pad, which is weird. It's the only game console that I know of that did this, that I know of. There could be others, but I don't know. I don't know everything. I'm not God. I'm not a god. You might worship me, I guess. I'm fine with that. But anyways, I'm kidding. But anyways, let's talk about collecting the 7800. Who in their right mind would own a 7800? Well, obviously, the diehard Atari fans are going to want this machine because it's pretty cool. And like I mentioned in my 2600 video, this is a way to own and play Atari 2600 cartridges on semi-authentic retro hardware. I say semi-authentic. Authentic in that, yes, it's made by Atari, but it's not an actual 2600, so it's akin to a retro clone, more or less. But not identical. Now, whereas there may or may not be retro clones compatible and flashback consoles compatible with 2600 software, to my knowledge, there are no retro clones of the 7800 or compatible with the 7800 library. And that's because the 7800 library just isn't worth a shit. You know, your modern compilations by Atari and Acclaim and Activision, not Acclaim. I get those two mixed up. Activision or whoever is putting them out there are most likely going to use the 2600 versions of the game or the arcade versions of the game, or both, depending on the collection. Nobody is putting out the Atari 7800 version of Asteroids because nobody played the 7800 version of Asteroids, and why would you? It sucks compared to literally all other versions of the game. That's not to say there aren't some original titles, a handful of original, sort of exclusive, unique titles to the 7800, which makes it appealing again to the Atari enthusiast, but also the die-hard retro collector, the completist that has to own everything. So to you, unfortunately, you don't have a lot of options. Your options are buy an original 7800 console or emulation. And emulation is dubious because there are not a lot of 7800 emulators to my knowledge. I believe MAME has some 7800 functionality, but I haven't tested it, so I can't comment on how usable it is. But as far as I know, it's the only emulator that can do 7800 emulation. And there's no market for 7800 emulation, so there's no robust emulator scene, unfortunately. The 7800 ROMs, downloadable via emulation on modern services, GOG, Steam, eShop, Nintendo Switch Online, PlayStation Network, etc., 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 doesn't exist. Those games do not exist. They've never been re-released. These versions of those games have never been re-released, to my knowledge. There might be some weird, obscure 7800 collection on PlayStation 3 or Steam or something that I don't know about, but why would there be when, at best, realistically, not being facetious, 20, 30,000 people at most would be interested. At most. Partially because a lot of the diehard Atari enthusiasts who would give a shit are old dudes, most of them dying off at this point, or having already left the video game market. And so you're left with retro gamers that kind of sort of remember it or have learned about it one way or another, and young kids that are just obsessed with the past for whatever reason, you know, which kudos to you if you are. I'm just giving you a fair warning. This is not the system to collect for because it is very hard to collect for. Because you are pretty much limited to original hardware, which again, you know, breaks down over time, and because of the rarity and difficulty to source parts and technicians who are familiar with it, it's hard to repair. So if you get one, you're rolling the dice if it even works, and you're taking a chance on how long it works once you get it, and you're taking an even bigger risk if you can get it repaired should you get one that don't work, or if it breaks down eventually, because it will break down eventually, everything does. So I'm going to say stay away from the 7800. It is not really worth collecting because, like I said, the software library is not really compelling. You can get most of the games that are on it, better versions elsewhere. And, you know, unless you're a hardcore collector, you're not going to want one anyways because you already own you already own a 2600. You've already got these games in their, you know, playable version. Or you already have an NES, and you've got the superior versions of those games anyways. So there's just not a lot of reason to own a 7800 at this point in time. Again, unless you had one as a kid and you're nostalgic for it and you just want one, in which case I can't talk you out of it. Go have fun. if you can get one that works. I'm just telling you that this is one of those systems that it's a lot harder to collect for. Also because when you go to eBay or whatever and you look for 7800 games, most of the time you're just going to find the Atari 2600 cartridge because they're compatible with the 7800, which makes it hard to find the exclusive 7800 software. And again, due to rarity and scarcity, because these games didn't sell well, they're going to be more expensive than you're probably willing to pay for them. And good luck finding them in the wild. You might never see them physically in the wild at a pawn shop or a retro video game store or even a convention. You might get lucky, but don't hold your breath. Don't count on it. I wish I had more to say about the 7800 because I did own one as a kid. Well, I played one as a kid. My cousin owned it, but I got to borrow it on regular intervals. So I have experience. I am the weirdo that has nostalgia for this machine. And even I'm going to tell you it's not worth owning today. It was worth owning in 1989, maybe. But by 1992, not so much. Today, not even at all.